Hello and welcome once again to FAA Safety Briefing Live. This is the May and June edition. I'm Paul Prydecker, and hello, Susan.
Hello, Paul.
So the magazine is there for non-commercial general aviation. We've talked about these goals before. Raise awareness, of course, of all of the FAA resources and explain some of the safety and regulatory issues. And of course, you and I always talk about this, how, we're always in training and always looking for more information.
Yeah, and this page also has, and I think this is going to stay up through the year. This is our 60th anniversary. The magazine, as you see on that video, the slide there, we've had different covers and different names and different styles, but pretty much the same fundamental goals all along. And when we reorganized a few years ago, we made sure that each of the departments that we have, the regular departments, has a specific mission and function, and we try to stick to that. As well as we designed each issue to have a specific theme or focus area. And one of my magazine colleagues came up with a term that I still use. We want them to be shelf stable. Would like for them to be not just useful for the couple of months of the cover date, but also for reference purposes for at least a year or so. And of course, we revisit topics periodically, and we've already been doing that.
Well, and the other thing I notice as I go through the magazine is that the information, none of it is a long read. It's informative, it's impactful, and it's a quick read on these topics. So it's easy to stay informed.
Well, the quick read part, that's something that we've been very focused of, very conscious of, because in a world where people are accustomed to getting information in short bursts and in single screens, we're aiming to accommodate that, including not just with the print version, but with the electronic versions of articles that appear through Medium. I always said, and of course this was kind of unique to where I used to live in Washington, D.C., but the articles needed to be of a length that you could read it in one or two metro stops. So we're aiming to be short and sweet and to the point. Very
good. So this one is called Sharing the Sky Safely, and it introduces a lot of information about, however you want to call them, drones, UAS, UAVs, and also a little bit more about space initiatives. So what will we go through tonight?
Yeah, this was when you talked about learning, Paul, I learned a lot from preparing this issue, because everything is constantly changing. The things that that people who are coming into aviation now are getting accustomed to, all sorts of technologies and options that simply didn't exist when I started flight training. But doing the magazine is a great way to keep up with all that. So we thought that this was a particularly appropriate time to do our Sharing the Sky Safely, new entrants in the National Airspace System. So you'll see the feature articles there, who's new in the neighborhood, Sharing the Sky Safely, that's the overall theme, but we're looking at unmanned traffic management, rolling out the rules, some of the new rules that have come along, some of the other initiatives, and then, as you mentioned, commercial space. And I knew, obviously, that the FAA had a role in commercial space, but I learned quite a bit about just how big the agency's role is in commercial space from preparing this issue.
Well, and as I was preparing this and reading, through the material, I received an article that came across my email from one of the associations, and as you well know, I have a connection to the UK with my family member living there, and we spent some time there. And the article was about how the UK Royal Mail is starting to use drones to deliver packages to an island off of the southwest coast of England.
Oh, goodness.
It's actually quite an impressive feat, because the island is 70 miles away from the mainland, and they're starting to deliver mail. And they interviewed some of the people on the island and about what they thought about it. And the comment was, we're all very happy about it because now we can start getting our mail on time. So
that's fun.
so just a, you know, ever increasing uses of these devices and so many different opportunities. So
well, and we get into that in this issue actually.
So Rick Domingo's column is you've taken the word or the acronym UAV and applied something different to it.
Yeah, this one is you know, a different take on what UAS means: utility, accessibility, and safety. And the article talks about the fact that, you know, as you were just talking about, Paul, that there is a great deal of utility in these devices, and we'll talk more about some of the specific things later on. You know, number, technical sophistication. But another thing about them is that they're accessible. So you do not have to, I never did add up all of the receipts from my flight training, and I think I would be a little frightened of the number if I did. But so flight training, sometimes resources are a barrier to entry, but UAS, there's kind of one for every budget. And so the accessibility and the ability to participate in this sector of aviation is much greater. But the safety piece hasn't changed. There are some different aspects of safety and different perspectives, but this is a key piece. And of course, the FAA safety is the top priority. And our mission is to safely integrate these new technologies and new entrants into the National Airspace System.
And Susan, I think it might have been in our last safety briefing live, or maybe the time before, we happened to come across the number that there are more than 7 times the number of drones as there are registered aircraft. And of course, that's on the increase by quite a lot.
It is. And so they have a vast range of sizes and capabilities and technologies. But this article also talks about what the FAA is doing for UAS integration. And the way that, and I keep saying integration because that's really an important point. This is not about carving off a section of airspace that will be reserved for UAS. This is about integrating these technologies and these aircraft into the system so that everybody will do what our theme says: share the skies safely. And the way that the agency has been going about it, it's very hard to regulate something you don't know. And we're all learning, and this is changing very rapidly. So the FAA has been using a series of programs and different initiatives to learn. And as it says here, the driving idea is incremental introduction via accommodation that we know is safe, which provides training wheels. We learn from that, and then we move to the next one. So it's going from like the trike to the training wheels to the bike, and maybe the unicycle at some point.
Well, and certainly the same thing had to happen years ago as more and more airplanes became useful and more common for transportation and for other purposes. More rules had to be developed for the same purpose. So this is just an extension of what's already being done on a fairly grand scale.
Indeed.
Yeah. So I always like this one because it has a little Shakespeare in it.
It does. I didn't even write it. I love literature. I didn't write it. So one of the things that we learn as we go through this is that there are so many new terms, technologies, there's acronyms, and there's even acronyms embedded in acronyms. So it's another new language to learn. And one of the articles actually addresses that in terms of, training drone pilots. They have to be trained into some of the language of what we're talking about in terms of airspace. So this is a very good review of just some of the nomenclature that we need to sort through. Yeah, it starts out with that quote where, well, the title is What's in a Name, and it starts out with that Shakespearean quote from Romeo and Juliet, actually. A rose by any other name would be as sweet. Well, this is, it explains the term drone, which I think that the FAA kind of resisted for a long time. And as they say in Star Wars, part of Star Trek, resistance is futile, prepare to be assimilated. So I think that there's a lot of what people use it all the time now. But it explains what an unmanned aircraft system is, what a vehicle is. And then this is a term that I always thought was helpful: remotely piloted aircraft system, that tends to be the international term. But I like that one simply because remotely piloted makes it clear that it actually does have a pilot. When you say unmanned, it suggests that nobody's there, and that's not true. And then there's some other, variations. First person view, FPV. I've learned a lot of fresh acronyms from here too. So the remote pilot has an onboard the aircraft view, and so it's kind of like you are there. You're looking at it as if you were sitting in the front seat of this little thing. And then there are model aircraft, which are a different thing entirely. But I thought that this was a nice introductory piece for here's what these things, here's what the terms mean. But I think most people just default to drone, and that's okay.
Well, and I thought the part about this description of a system, because it really is a system.
Totally.
You have some electronic architecture, you've got the drone itself, you've got the person at the business end of all of this, and perhaps an extended ground crew depending on the operation. So
exactly.
What's new in the neighborhood? Really kind of looking at some of the new things that are coming in terms of space and in terms of supersonic aircraft. I remember, and I know you do as well, from commercial aviation. The Concorde was quite the aircraft at the time, and will always be remembered by many. As a young person, I think I was maybe 9 at the time. I went to a Armed Forces Day presentation at an airport near where I grew up in northern Texas. And I was actually able to see the Valkyrie, which for those of you who might remember it as the XB-70. And that was really one of the really ahead of its time in terms of trying to do supersonic flight. And as a young person of 9, seeing the XB-70, if our viewers haven't not familiar with it, it's worth a look up to see what it is. But they only made 2 of them. One of them unfortunately crashed, and the other one is in the Air Force Museum in Dayton. But nothing but smoke and noise. It was a wonderful experience to be able to see that and to see it fly. And then, of course, the Concorde. So it's nice to see that there's more discussion about development of supersonic aircraft and other approaches into our system.
Well, another thing, game-changing innovation, people talk about drones, but this whole idea of electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles to move passengers around. Sure. And I know people who are working in those sectors now, who are working for companies that are making these things, and they seem very futuristic, but they also are making real progress. And then, so you mentioned supersonic travel. There's a final rule that streamlines and clarifies procedures for approval for that. We were chatting earlier about some of these things like this commercial space launches, 41 in 2020. So even if some of us didn't fly as much as we might have in the past, there was quite a bit of commercial space activity, considering, it used to be a once every 3 years thing, and 41 launches in a year is quite a bit. But again, what we were talking about, key to being able to do this is the risk-based decision-making, performance-based requirements, and providing guardrails, but also room to experiment and innovate.
Well, and so many things that, we look to say, well, this will be in the future. So much of it we've already seen in interpretation of science fiction and other things from years ago. Some of what we saw years ago is the reality now. So
absolutely. And actually science fiction, I think, inspired some of the realities. For sure. Which is a good segue into this article, Sharing the Skies Safely. This one starts out, and by the way, we benefited this time. We worked with a lot of colleagues in the UAS integration office in the commercial space area and other parts of the FAA that we don't interact with as much. And we found some really good writers and some really interesting stories that we heard in the background as we were preparing this. But this one kind of starts out like the Jetsons. I remember that cartoon, that Saturday morning cartoon. You know, it's 2030, you're flying club, you got a fully electric airport. I suspect that hamburgers are going to be a lot more expensive than $100, but you know, you jump in your little electric vehicle and go zipping around to get your $100 hamburger or whatever it costs. And there's not as much that you have to do with it. And that is all because of this UTM, the unmanned, the U.S. traffic management system.
This is one of those things that's an acronym buried in an acronym.
Yeah.
Is the UAS traffic management.
Yeah, and UTM is not a single big monolithic tool at all. It's federated, lots of participants, but it all depends on data sharing, cooperation, and a lot of it sounds like if it goes the way that everybody wants it to be, it's going to be kind of seamless to to people who are using it. You can use it to plan routes and navigate, and the services are going to communicate to help you avoid. I like this term, strategic deconfliction. But the other thing that was in this article is that, yeah, this may sound like space travel, but it's actually a lot of it is available right here and right now.
Sure. Well, and the evolution of just the drone technology, the differentiation between line of sight and then operating beyond line of sight is addressed. And of course, if your line of sight is going to be more easy to manage and beyond line of sight needs some additional integration into the system, and it puts a lot of training requirements, of course, to integrate within there. So just in the last few years, I mean, the ability of drones to go, beyond the front yard is meant that, the rules, the regulations, and as you've talked about, the integration into the airspace is more and more important. This makes me think about your former director of flight standards, John Duncan, your friend and colleague. I was in a conference, some industry conference a few years ago, and he was one of the keynote speakers, and he was telling the story of how, like a lot of children, he had been looking at airplanes and would watch them fly over. And he said one day he was about 5 years old, and he went up to his mom and was looking up in the sky at a contrail, and he said, "Mom, when I grow up, I'm going to regulate those."
Yeah, I'm not sure too many people said that, but that's a good introduction to this rolling out the rules piece. I would note that if you have the print copy, you might want to go look at the online issue, because we have made some updates to that particular article. But this describes two new drone rules: remote identification and operations over people. And I have to say that the acronyms here, I'm not sure I would have picked those, but there they are. Operations over people and remote ID. They're both performance-based rules, and they're both intended to help with the integration. They're both built on the experience and the activities that have been going on when we talked about strategic accommodation, trying to learn from projects what needs to be regulated. So remote ID is your digital license plate. That's how most people are describing it. And it's intended to balance safety with, the whole idea is the need for expanded operations with safety. And that's always the balance you try to strike, with obviously safety being the top priority.
Well, and the article goes on to say that there's two main ways of doing the RID, and then there is a third way, one is the drone has an embedded RID device in it to begin with. The other is there's a broadcast module which can be attached to the drone. It's a separate device. And then the other is this, a new term which I wasn't familiar with again until I read this, the FAA Recognized Identification Area, which is an area created to be able to fly drones without RID, but to be safe.
Yeah, that was a new term for me too. I think it's because it's a new thing. The article has a lot of great graphics in it that will just take you through what the main pieces of the rule are. So this is not a, please don't think that it's just a repeat or rehash of what the rules say, because legal language can be a little difficult to read. This has some really nice graphics and 1, 2, 3, 4s, and then it talks about the 4 categories for ops over people. The whole thing is that all of these are about setting the stage for more complex operations. Yeah,
I thought the 4 categories of operations, and then these new rules, and then plus how to be RID compliant. It's as we talked about earlier, it's a lot of information in a fairly quick read. This next one it's one of our normal columns, vertically speaking, and it's of course about helicopters. And this is really an article about how we have to work together as drone operators and in aircraft like helicopters. It lists some techniques for helicopter operators to fly offensively and defensively, I would say. So some very good information there, but the spirit of it is training and examples of how to, as you said earlier, play nice together.
Well, and playing nice is very important. Remote ID is part of making, helping those things to accommodate those things. But one of the points that it makes, and I'm kind of cognizant of this as the West Coast goes into wildfire season, that there are public safety, there are a lot of helicopters that go over during wildfire fighting, and drones are sometimes used, but this is not a fly your own drone in to check it out, because these interfere with with firefighting or public safety operations. And when the FAA hears about that, it's the improper drone operations is something that we have to look into. And in some cases, the compliance program, if you need to learn about it, but obviously if it's intentional, reckless, willful, there would be a different approach to it. But the whole idea of mid-airs, which is kind of implied in this article, it's particularly compelling. If I'm sure everybody by now has seen the pictures from that accident in Centennial. It's just absolutely incredible that those 2 airplanes both landed, one with a parachute and the other, I'm not sure how the Metroliner held together, but it was pretty amazing.
Well, and the other part of this article too is that drones can be a element of risk mitigation for helicopter operators, because the type of operations that helicopters might have done in the past can now be done with drones more safely and more effectively. So it's also an evolution of some of the technology and uses. So again, our vertically speaking column was good, and a lot of good information in it. You're not alone with your drone.
Yeah, so, that was a fun title. We had fun with that one too.
So your social media editor, I believe, wrote this, Paul Cianciola.
Yeah, and there are a lot, we've already established, there are a lot of new acronyms for the drone world. And this Connect You, I had heard of it, but I had to actually learn from this that it stands for Cross-Organizational Networking, Education, and Communications Team for UAS. And this has been around since 2016. It's a fast team outreach. It's got 12 members that include experts in a lot of aspects of UAS. And the whole thing has been to looking at the fact that the UAS remote pilots are, in some cases, people who already have pilot certificates are getting involved in UAS, but in some cases, this is the entry point. And new pilots who are not coming in through the kinds of ground schools that we went through may not be familiar with the sorts of things that we kind of take for granted. So this is about learning to integrate, pioneer, as it says at the bottom there, new approaches to communication and outreach, webinars, all kinds of things to educate new entrants into what does some of this stuff mean and how do you safely operate your drone. And then there's also, you saw in there that we have drone pros.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So
there's a link at the end, or a phone number at the end about how you can become a drone pro. And it basically starts by going to your Fast Team program manager and discussing that. So it's about education, and as you said, it's about learning some of the language and the technology so that pilots and drone operators are all speaking some of the same language and we're familiar with each other's world, so to speak.
Well, the other thing that Connect You is trying to do is to help UAS operators understand what they need to do for things like if you want to operate at night, or if you want to do visual line of sight, if you're looking for a waiver, if you're looking for to do something different. It's very easy in a big bureaucracy to get processes, to get crossways with the processes, but Connect You is all about educating, not just about this is the environment that you're operating in, but it's also about educating on here's how to do some of the things that you want to do with your drone.
And the other part of the article is that if you do want to be a drone pro, there's some requirements, and the article goes through and lists the 4 or 5 bullet points of general requirements. So it's good information and a good way to have an impact into the industry. And speaking of impact, that brings us to our FAA faces.
Yeah,
So,
Guido Hasek, he, well, like a lot of us, he got started early with airplanes. He said 12. I can beat him because I got interested when I was 3. It took me a few more years than that to get involved in aviation because there was this funny little thing like time and money. But anyway, he got his first airplane ride at 12 and then went on from there. Pilot and maintenance technician, started volunteering for the FAST team. And in fact, that's where I met him not too long after I started working for the FAA. He invited me to come up to do a FAST team program on something I was working on at the time. So had a really good time visiting him in his home territory at the time. And he is the team lead for Connect You, which we were just talking about.
And it's all of the people that you feature in FAA Faces, they all have such interesting backgrounds and entry into flying as well as entry into the FAA. So they bring a lot of their experience and some of the passions from other careers into the FAA, and this seems like the same for this gentleman.
Well, and because he's bilingual in both worlds, he's obviously gotten very involved in the drone world, that he's able to help bridge the gaps. And he's the one who pointed out, some of the biggest challenges are that drone language and traditional aviation are different, and you need unique approaches because the demographics in some cases are different. But they've also designated, as you see on the slide there, qualified third parties to administer, and there's another fun acronym, the Recreational UAS Safety Test, TRUST. But the question he asked at the end, the difference between an aviator and a pilot, that's kind of out of Richard Bach. So he's speaking my language there too.
Yes, I saw that and I enjoyed that. I think he has such a nice way of approaching this, so it's nice to see him in there. Our next one is Don't Fear the Drone, and this is by your colleague Jennifer. a good writer and a lot of information. And the one that stuck out was by 2024, we could have as many as 800,000 registered drones, which seems like
which is a lot. Registered commercial drones, okay, and that's different from
yes.
the fact that total registered drones. And this is a discussion about some of the fears that people already in an industry have when a new technology comes in and it's innovative, but I think the term that they use a lot is disruptive. And so I think there's a fear that, and you hear people talking about getting in airplanes with no pilots in the front. I think we're a little ways from that.
Indeed.
But the reality here is to talk about some of the value and the added value and the additional things that drones can do, including dangerous jobs where you wouldn't or couldn't send a traditional pilot or an aircraft into.
Well, it's like anything with technology. I'm sure it wasn't that long ago that people were just afraid of glass cockpits, glass technology, autopilots, more automation. But we've learned to use it, to manage it, to adapt to it. And this is just another example of it started out not that long ago, and it's been rapidly developing. And with rapidly developing technology, as we've talked about, it needs to be managed. There has to be, of course, some rule and regulation to it. But I think the other part of this is you don't really know what it might create in terms of people's exposure to this aspect of aviation might then go into other aspects of aviation in terms of maintenance, in terms of possibly being a pilot or working at the FAA. So this is a whole new area where not only their commercial opportunities are expanding rapidly, but it might be a source of other people in the workforce.
Well, and I thought that one of the key points, which I made sure I put on the slide here, a huge boost to the economy, that if you look at that, estimates indicate that UAS could generate $84 billion and create 100,000 new jobs over the next 10 years. And
Sure.
That might be conservative because there are just so many areas where we can't even imagine all of them yet. And people, every time you have a technological development, people think of new things that they can do beyond that. So yeah, this was let's get the benefits and don't be afraid that it's gonna. It will change some of the ways that we do things now. But hey, when the airplane came along, it kind of changed the trains and.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think another title for this could have just been "Don't Fear the Technology," because it's just another example of technology, and it's here. It's here to stay, and it's going to grow. So I remember a pilot I used to work with many years ago was lamenting, all of the glass, cockpit technology, and I said, it's here and it's new, and we can teach you this, and there's so many advantages. And I said, for example, the airplane you're going to be moving into has a moving map technology, and I said it helps with situational awareness and safety, and he said, well, the only moving map I'm used to is the road atlas when it falls off my knee. so
yeah, well. We all have to adapt.
We all have to catch up, right? Right.
Yeah.
And this is especially exciting too, because all of the academia and the chances of introducing younger generations and diverse generations into this market and technology.
Yeah, the Collegiate Training Initiative is to provide FAA expertise and backing for careers in this area. So this initiative is just over a year old now, and its goal is to ensure that graduates, as it says there, have the knowledge and the skills to pursue UAS-related careers. And it is very much connected to the concern about aviation workforce development, having qualified professionals, and supporting the idea of integration. So if you'll see, you see over there, and Paul, I think you talked to somebody today who has participants in this.
I talked to our friend and our colleague Kent Lovelace from the University of North Dakota in Grand Forks, and I was reading through this, and I just sent him a quick message, and I said, "How many people do you have enrolled in your UAS program?" And he said 200, which is it's a big number. So
it's a pretty big number. 71 schools, 135 have asked to join. Another thing that the FAA is doing is making sure that, reaching out to diversity, to minority serving institutions, and you see the list there. Also, some of the public two-year colleges. So this is aiming to cast the net far and wide and encourage all kinds of people who may not have thought about aviation before to get involved. It goes back to what Rick Domingo's column was talking about: utility, accessibility, and safety. The accessibility means this is a technology that is more accessible and more affordable in many cases than traditional aviation may have been. So it's all about promoting science, technology, engineering, and math, and trying to work with people and bring them into aviation however we can.
Yeah, it's such great opportunities. This is a great resource about trying to learn more about this. So can you tell us a little bit more about this page?
Yeah, Checklist is the department that we use to focus on FAA resources. The FAA website's a pretty big place, and you may not know of all of the resources that are available for free. And in this case, we have the FAA website has a UAS portal, and when you enter the portal, there's a landing page that has links to all sorts of things. So if you're not in aviation at all, or if you're a traditional pilot and you're looking to get into the UAS area, you can go here, and there's a decision tree that you can follow. I clicked around and experimented with it, so it works. If you know where you want to go, you click and it takes you down a path. If you click on not sure, you'll get some questions that will try to help narrow it down to where you want to go. And so it offers information on the Before You Fly app, to the drone zone, keeping your remote pilot certificate current, and links to information as well about the new rules that we talked about earlier. And there are links to information like this new advisory circular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just going to mention that there's a new AC out, which answers a lot of the questions. So I'm sure that this is a site that is updated often because there's so many things changing and so much material coming.
Yeah, but I think it's a great place. If you're interested in this, go to the UAS portal and bookmark it. I don't remember specifically, but most FAA website pages, there's an opportunity to subscribe to it. So when it is updated, you could get a notice about it. There are several pages that I subscribe to, so I get regular email updates for things.
Sure. So I like this column. I recognize it as yours right away because the alliteration a bit of ruminations on remoteness. And what do you mean?
Well, I was trying to figure out how to close the issue, which is the purpose of this this particular department, and it lets me try to be creative. But this one was not so hard to do because I just don't like the word remote. I think that remote, because the definition there is having little to do with or connection to something. And so I have always resisted the idea, even though I'm a full-time telework employee, I like the term distributed workforce, because I think when you talk about remote employees, it suggests that you're disconnected. And in fact, I did an online degree, and I can tell you that as a teleworking employee, I sometimes am far more connected than if I were sitting in an office with people who may or may not stop by. I mean, sometimes you sit in an office and you communicate electronically with people who are in the next office, which is kind of funny. But I think what I really wanted to get at in this piece, though, is remote does not mean that you are not involved and not connected. I would suggest, based on what I know about it, is that drone flying or being a remote pilot involves just as much, if not more, connection, because it's not simple. You need to know the aircraft, you need to know systems, you need to know airspace. You may have a crew, you may have all kinds of, you may have a multi-member crew, not just a first officer. So remote is, it's a term, and I think we're kind of stuck with it. But the real point that I wanted to make is the last one that's on the slide here. There is nothing remote about piloting a drone. And so pilots need to stay connected to everything that they're doing. Situational awareness, the same stuff that you do everywhere else. So those were my ruminations on remoteness.
Nicely said. Space, again, as a young person, I watched all the launches, the Mercury program, the Gemini program, the Apollo program, and the shuttles, and then there was not much activity, and now there's a lot more activity. And again, this is an example of something that the FAA needs to have some view over, because it's part of the airspace.
Well, you know, the private ownership and operation are starting up. Government had a big role at the beginning because it was too expensive, but now commercial space has grown up, and so the FAA is licensing domestic launch sites, and you see the list of states there. Yes. With more planned in the future. New processes to the dynamic launch and reentry windows. There's this funny thing, the Space Data Integrator System, which will allow launch operators to share telemetry data. It says the goal is to have it operational by spring 2021, which would be about now. Then the other piece is that I think naturally people think of space and they think of NASA and not the FAA. But the author here, one of our colleagues, really explains that NASA is primarily about research and development, and it's not about regulation. And now that we're getting into commercial space, regulation of things like airspace and spaceports and airmen, this is something that we have a lot of experience with. So certifying airports, carriers, operators, launch approvals, all of those things are roles that the FAA has always taken. We're just moving them into the commercial space realm.
And there's so much going on, and it's really nice to see it again. And I was stunned when last year when they had the first launch with the two individuals, saw a view of their flight deck, and oh my goodness, the compared to the capsules of Gemini and Apollo. I mean, this is like sitting in a Lexus, and going to space in it. It was truly amazing.
The other thing that was amazing, and this is a little bit off topic, but the space suits that they wore.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you see Apollo 13, and they're like these Pillsbury Doughboy creatures, and these guys were in something far more sleek and streamlined than that. But again, I think it's really great that the agency has so much of a role in and working with NASA on all of these things. But I think that as commercial space literally takes off, that there's going to be a bigger and bigger role. We do actually have a whole line of business for commercial space in the FAA.
Yeah, it's a great topic. It's good to see the growth. This next one is about GA activity survey, and it's just trying to get a handle on GA operations in Part 135. And what do you use that information for?
Well, all kinds of things. Surveys, when you get a survey, whether it's electronic or in the paper or the paper one, which, by the way, you can do this survey, either one, there's a temptation to just put it aside. But surveys, and especially this General Aviation and 135 activity survey, it's in its 43rd year, but that is how the FAA gets information about the fleet, the hours flown, how people are using GA aircraft. And the reason, it's pretty short, it's 10 minutes if you get it, but the purpose of this is to help direct the products and services. It's used for safety analysis, for forecasting and planning, accident rates, spotting trends, determining safety performance. So there are a lot of different uses for it. It is deaggregated data, and nothing is connected to individuals. That's something people worry about sometimes. And the FAA, as it does with a lot of things, there's a firm that's contracted by the FAA to conduct the survey. And they made it a point to say in here that they want to be available if people have questions or concerns. And so they're available if people need to talk about a piece of this. But if you happen to get one of these surveys, the point of this is please do fill it out and send it in, because it's kind of like the census. Services and goods and all kinds of things are allocated based on what you think the activity in the population is.
Sure. Susan, the last time we had this, we introduced Susan Northrup, and now her article is about flight path to transparency, is a bit about some of her initiatives for medical certification.
Yeah, she has already been reaching out a lot. Dr. Northrup introduced herself in our last issue, but this piece, and I think this is going to be, it's going to resonate with a lot of people out there, that she's totally aware. And remember from the last time, she and her husband are both pilots. They own a couple of aircraft. That she knows there's frustration with how things are being processed. So they have been meeting with stakeholders virtually, like everything else that we do these days. And the two overarching goals here, one is, as it says here, a reliable, consistent, and quality decision within 60 days of somebody who presents for certification. And second, if you don't meet the standard, use the best means possible to figure out if they can safely be certified. So another thing that is related to this is processing time. We talked about the 60 days, but they're looking at moving to electronic systems that will enable you to track the application package. They've identified new conditions that are the CASI conditions that can be certified in the office, and also the AME assisted special issuance process. So they're also looking for more outreach, education videos. But I think that she is very committed, as she said, and she stresses in every appearance that she makes, very committed to finding a pathway to yes, that to certify as many people as safely as possible and as quickly and efficiently as possible. So I think that we will be seeing some real positive changes in the days to come.
Well, it's good to see that and to read about it, and we'll look forward to her next column, because it's very informative, and we'll be anxious to see what's the next step.
And I think the FAA is still figuring out its participation at AirVenture, but usually the Federal Air Surgeon and team, they almost always go, and they tend to be one of the most popular exhibits that we have in the FAA Safety Center. I'm hoping that we'll be able to do things there because, with more people being vaccinated, which is the topic of the next piece here.
It is about vaccines. Of course, you can't turn on the news anymore without hearing stories about vaccines and our progress and the continued development and all of the vaccines that are still undergoing evaluation. So this is an article that summarizes a little bit of the science, but brings in important FAA information about which ones are been approved by the FAA, and the fact that there's still a waiting period after you've been vaccinated.
Well, I thought this was kind of fun, because you think of vaccines, you hear about them being the infectious, live but attenuated, yes, and all the stuff that were in the vaccines that I got as a kid. But COVID-19 vaccines are a whole new level of technology. Indeed. And the ones that have been have emergency use authorization, which is explained here, those are a totally different technology that I think is pretty stunning, as well as the development time. But this explains that, of course, again, the FAA does not. We don't approve or accept, we kind of accept things, and we determine what can be safely used in aviation. And in this case, the decision was to go ahead and authorize use of these vaccines, but the 48-hour waiting period is because there are side effects. I know I had a couple of days, and I think you did too, after the vaccine, where
Sure.
didn't feel really 100%. And some people have no side effects at all. Other people do. But the point is, be safe and take the 48 hours. And the FAA is going to continue to monitor additional vaccines as they come online too.
Yeah, it's great progress, and you know, the FAA is doing the right and the obvious thing, allowing vaccines to be approved, building in a little bit of caution. So, our maintenance nuts, bolts, and electrons is about aircraft mufflers, and this is quite compelling. About first of all, it can be a hidden problem that you may not see. The article is really about encouraging you to, you know, during a pre-flight or post-flight inspection, to have a look, and talks about some of the risks. Carbon monoxide, of course, is one of them. Fires are the other. I'm sorry?
Power loss or failure is another one.
Power loss, of course. It's one of those things that it's a component that we take for granted, but we shouldn't.
Well, yeah, exactly. And these are things, and the reason it's in nuts, bolts, and electrons is it's partly to educate pilots on what are some of the things that you might want to talk to the mechanic about, but also to remind mechanics that this is something that you need to not just look at the outside, but look at things a little bit more closely. I will say that it's been interesting with this article. We have had a significant amount of feedback from people who really appreciated this information. It's like, oh gosh, I didn't know that. And I do know that the inspector who contributed a lot of the information here was quite passionate about it, and has been very excited to be able to get this information out to people, and to let people know also about things like this advisory circular and the pressure testing. So this is not trying to teach people who are not mechanics to be mechanics, but it is about trying to make us all aware that these are things that we need to be mindful of and maybe ask questions about.
Well, and you're right. I mean, raising awareness is what it takes. I mean, if you think about the function it performs and where it's doing it, it's subject to horrendous temperatures, lots of pressure, and a lot of heat. And it has the integrity of it needs to be checked from time to time. So I'm not surprised you got a lot of good feedback on it, because it's something that's quite important to the group. As we get close to the end here, this ATIS is our aviation news roundup. Interesting statistic that with the number of flights that were down last year, the laser strikes are on the increase, which is not good news.
Well,
I remember my last month of flying for the airline, I had a laser strike incident going into O'Hare. And if you tell the controllers that, they're very serious about it. They want to know exactly where, and they can get your position, and of course they try to find the person.
Well, and when they do find them, the FAA takes that really seriously in terms of fines and that sort of thing. There are a couple of things in here too that I thought were fun. We in a previous episode we talked about webcams, and the webcam program, it started in Alaska and now it's moved to Hawaii. So if you're flying in the Hawaiian Islands, you can take advantage of that. And then, consistent with our theme of UAS, there are 5 airports that have been selected to test and evaluate some new systems for UAS. And this is, again, we talked earlier about the training wheels, using programs to try to allow certain things with safety parameters around it, and see what we can learn from that, and then move forward.
I think the other state that we talked about webcams was in Colorado, looking at some of the mountain airports and looking at some of the real-time weather data and weather information coming from that. So this seems like it's something that's just is expanding.
Yeah, and I think it's expanding as quickly as they can get it done. But I thought that was kind of neat to see the follow-up to Hawaii.
Very good. We always talk about this, and you've just addressed this, that you often get some feedback in various social media venues, but what are some of the other ways people can give you feedback?
Well, you can always write to us, safetybriefing@faa.gov. We monitor the mailbox, and we do respond to that directly and or through forum, which is we're printing letters to the editor. We're on Twitter at FAA Safety Brief. We contribute to the FAA's social media, Facebook. So there are a lot of ways to reach us, but those are two of the obvious ones. And those two addresses are monitored pretty constantly.
Very good. As we always do, we give a little wrap up about how to get FAA safety briefing.
Well, there's the website. You've got email notifications. We already provided the Twitter address. You can subscribe to the print edition, and the free download is in PDF, and we've got archived issues. But we also put mobile-friendly links to individual features on that page. And those also are distributed in individual articles through the FAA's Medium blog. So there are a lot of different ways to get the content.
I'd like to download my own version. I like it a lot. So, and July and August, what can we expect?
Well, I think I found this picture. This is a candidate for the cover picture, or at least some version of it. Yeah, this is about embracing the environment. It's an update to a flying green issue that we did several years ago, because this is something that's important to everybody, and I think there's some really fun stuff that we're looking into here.
Well, we'll look forward to it, and I'm always interested to see what the content will be, because it keeps me sharp, learning some new things.
That's
as a reminder, folks. Wings and AMT credit. Once again, we bring you the page that you can link to get credit. Make sure you take the test, of course. And that's about the end of this for tonight, Susan. It's good to work with you again. It's been remote. But
yeah, I know. I was going to say that it's been remote, but we were connected. So there you go.
See you next time, folks. Be safe. Take care.
Bye-bye.